When you look at paintings of ladies in lavish dresses, it is easy to think that life for a woman in the Middle Ages was beautiful. But once you take a closer look at what everyday life was really like for an average woman back then, the picture changes completely. There was no freedom, no peace, and no control over her own life. Just an existence where things that were once seen as normal now come across as pure cruelty. In the Middle Ages, a woman did not belong to herself. Law, religion, and family all treated her not as a person, but as property. From early childhood, her path in life was laid out without room to stray. She did not choose who she would be, where she would live, who she could love, when to marry or whether to have children. All of those decisions were made for her, often without her knowledge. Girls were engaged young. Sometimes by age 6 or 7, an agreement was already in place. A marriage could be legally valid from the age of 12. Parents arranged everything, the bride's father, the groom's father, sometimes even a landowner or a member of the clergy. The girl herself was not asked. Marriage was a transfer of ownership. A woman was handed from one man to another like a piece of property. Her dowry might include livestock, land, money, or handmade goods. She could be given to a widower with children, or to an old man, whatever best served the family's interests. If she refused, she might be beaten, disowned, or sent to a convent. After marriage, the woman fell completely under her husband's authority. He controlled where she went, who she spoke to, what she wore, what she ate, when she slept. And of course, he controlled her body. In medieval society, the concept of marital rape did not exist. A man was considered to have a natural right to sex with his wife, and she was expected to endure it, regardless of desire, health, pregnancy, or pain. If she refused, he could punish her. The church reinforced this system. She was taught that resistance was sinful and obedience was virtuous. He also controlled her labor. A woman was expected to run the household, raise children, serve her husband and his family. Sometimes she also worked in the fields, a workshop, or at the market. Everything she did belonged to him. Even if she earned money, it became his legal property. She could not own anything in her name without his permission. Women gave birth as often as their bodies could bear. Contraception was considered heresy, and abortion equated to murder. If the husband wanted another child, she was expected to comply, even if the last birth had nearly killed her. Divorce was almost impossible. In Catholic regions, it was outright forbidden. The most one could hope for was separation with church approval. A husband could leave, take a mistress, or even another wife, especially among the nobility. If a woman tried to leave him, she could be dragged back by force or even executed for adultery. Among peasants, punishment was less formal but just as brutal: isolation, beatings, exile. In towns and cities, it could mean legal prosecution. Widowhood often brought even greater hardship. Without a male heir, a woman could lose everything: her home, her belongings, even the right to stay where she lived. A male guardian was often appointed to oversee her affairs, usually a relative of her late husband. She became someone's property all over again. And if she wanted to remarry, that too was decided for her. Under the law, she was considered a partial person. Her signature carried no legal weight. She could not write a will, buy or sell property, or sign a contract. All business had to go through her husband or father. Even noblewomen lived in a gilded cage. They wore fine dresses, learned manners, read books, but they too were traded in political marriages arranged by their fathers. Even queens had little control over their lives. Kings, advisors, bishops, and ministers made the decisions for them. A medieval woman could not even choose death. Suicide was a grave sin, punished by posthumous shame. In many parts of Europe, a man had the legal right to moderate corporal punishment of his wife. This meant beatings were allowed, as long as they did not kill her. Bruises, broken bones, scars, they were all tolerated. A woman could not take her case to court, and if she tried, she often ended up being the one blamed. In the Middle Ages, women did not have to decide what to wear; those decisions were made for them. And almost everything they were expected to wear restricted their bodies and movements. A woman's appearance had to match societal expectations, no matter how conflicting they were. She was not allowed to look too attractive, but at the same time she was expected to be. Clothing had to conceal the body, yet subtly suggest its shape. If she dressed too modestly, she was seen as a fanatic or a recluse. Too openly, and she risked being labeled a witch or a harlot. Corsets became one of the most recognizable symbols of women's suffering through fashion. They were laced so tightly that women often fainted. The pressure crushed the waist, cut into the ribs, made breathing difficult, and left bruises. In some cases, ribs were even broken. But loosening the laces was not an option. One of the strangest and most dangerous fashion items was a type of shoe called polaines. These were pointed shoes with toes extending up to half a meter. They were stiff, laced tightly, and offered no flexibility. Feet would blister and bleed, arches would deform, and walking turned into an awkward shuffle. Then again, most women were not expected to move around much in the first place. Women were required to cover their heads and necks. A proper appearance meant wearing a cap, a hood, a veil, often several layers at once. Hair was considered a source of temptation. It had to be tightly pulled back, braided, and hidden. Loose hair was reserved for private moments or madness. Appearing in public or in church with uncovered hair could lead to punishment, humiliation, or accusations of moral corruption. In the 14th and 15th centuries, high waistlines and long trailing gowns came into fashion. Among noble women, the train of the dress would drag along the ground, collecting dirt, manure, and dust. It was meant to symbolize status. In reality, the long fabric caused tripping, got caught underfoot, tangled with children or animals. Cleaning it was a nightmare. Maids had to scrub the cloth with soap, vinegar, or lye by hand with no gloves, all for the sake of a single banquet or visit. The design of women's clothing was intentionally restrictive. Dresses were long, sleeves were tight, and laces were stiff. Climbing stairs, walking through a muddy street, lifting a child, or carrying anything heavy, all of it became a struggle. This was also the period when a strange contradiction emerged around pregnancy. In the early Middle Ages, women hid it even within marriage. Cloaks and loose garments disguised their bellies, and visible pregnancy was seen as shameful. But by the 16th and 17th centuries, attitudes had reversed. Special padded bellies became popular, especially in England, to simulate pregnancy. Fertility had become fashionable. Even women who were not pregnant would accentuate their stomachs artificially. Beauty ideals at the time demanded a high, smooth forehead, seen as a sign of intelligence, nobility, and refinement. To achieve the look, women would shave or pluck their eyebrows and remove the front portion of their hairlines. In some cases, up to a third of the forehead's length was cleared. Methods included tweezers, chalk and vinegar pastes, or even resin that caused chemical burns. By the late Middle Ages, poison cosmetics had become a trend. White lead was used as face powder, and mercury in blush. The skin would develop sores and lesions, but pale skin was considered noble. Women also took substances to purify their complexion, laxatives, emetics, and herbs that caused seizures. If a woman behaved in a way that did not align with expectations, society made sure she was put back in her place. It did not really matter what she had done. Maybe she spoke at the wrong time, or disagreed, or looked in the wrong direction at the wrong person, or just in the wrong way. Maybe she went out without permission, stayed home on a church day, did not answer her husband when he called. Maybe she was too confident, or simply too noticeable. The punishments varied from humiliation to execution. A bucket of filth could be dumped on her. Her head might be shaved. She could be tied to a post and paraded through the streets. If brought before a court, she would be chained to a pillory in the town square, sometimes for days. Some were forced to wear iron masks that pressed into the skull. Others had spiked gags inside their mouths to silence any unnecessary words. For arguing with her husband, a woman might be flogged with birch rods, in public squares, or at home if the man was patient. These beatings were not considered abuse. They were seen as a way to bring her to her senses. In England, there was a device called the bridle, a metal frame that fit over the head with a plate pressing down on the tongue. A woman in this contraption would be led through the streets, As a warning to others, she had spoken too much. Another device, known as the scold's fiddle, was used to resolve domestic disputes peacefully. It worked like a double set of stocks, locking two people face to face so they could not turn away. The idea was to force them to talk it out and find a compromise. If a husband and wife argued too loudly and disturbed the neighbors, they could be locked together in the scold's fiddle and marched through the town until they made peace. Or if two women got into a fight at the market, they might be chained face to face and kept that way until they demonstrated Christian forgiveness and calm. Some towns had wooden chairs placed at the edge of a pond. A woman would be strapped in, lifted on a rope, and dunked into the water. Sometimes they held her under for minutes. Some women drowned and never came back up. Punishment for adultery, or even suspicion of it, could be fatal. A woman might be thrown into a river. If she drowned, she was innocent. If she floated, she was guilty. She could be hanged for trying to leave her husband, or for running away from a convent, or for refusing to marry. In certain regions, public punishment was paired with a shame costume. A woman would be forced to wear a marker, like a noisemaker, a collar with writing, or a bright cape, so that everyone would know this was a disobedient woman. People avoided her. Children pointed. Elders spat at her back. If a woman was intelligent, self-reliant, or confident, that alone could be viewed as a threat. She might be accused of witchcraft, of making deals with the devil, of ruining crops, even if all she had done was heal with herbs or teach someone to read. Very little is known about menstruation in the Middle Ages. Most of what was written at the time came from men, more specifically monks. They had little understanding of female physiology, yet still confidently recorded what they believed to be the proper way of dealing with it. One medieval herbal manual, translated from Latin into Old English, suggested a bizarre remedy: grind nettles in a mortar, mix them with honey and damp wool, and apply the paste to the genitals. Sounds like a joke, but it was offered as serious medical advice. What that actually felt like in practice can only be imagined. The same source recommended wearing a pouch around the neck filled with ash from frog bones. Supposedly, it helped ease symptoms, though it never specified which ones. According to medieval doctors, however, the most effective solution was wine. Women were encouraged to drink it regularly. Menstruation was considered shameful. A woman was seen as unclean during those days. In some areas, she was not allowed to enter church. People believed that her mere touch could sour milk, poison infants who looked at her, destroy crops, rust iron, and even infect dogs with rabies. There were also claims that she could spread leprosy. Because of this, women tried to conceal their condition as much as possible. Even at home, among family, they were expected to keep it hidden. Cloth rags, often made from linen, served as pads. To increase absorption, marsh moss was sometimes placed between the fabric layers. These makeshift pads frequently leaked, irritated the skin, and caused infections. Changing them during the day was rarely an option, especially for women working in fields, living among men, or lacking a private space. There was no attempt to mask odor. There were no scented products or even basic protection. In particularly bad cases, women might tuck aromatic herbs, like mint or yarrow, into their clothing. But more often, they simply endured. Summer was the worst: heat, sweat, and all of it trapped under multiple layers of clothing. Sometimes, women would sew the pad directly into their underwear to keep it in place. They changed it infrequently. Washing was done by hand, in cold water without soap. Drying happened in attics, under beds, or out in sheds, always out of sight. Even used rags were kept hidden. Anything related to a woman's body was expected to remain invisible. The one small relief was that menstruation occurred less often. Medieval women tended to be pregnant more frequently than women today, and menopause arrived earlier due to poor nutrition, limited meat in the diet, and for peasant women, intense physical labor that drained the body early. Giving birth has never been easy, but in the Middle Ages it was genuinely life-threatening. Until the 18th century, about 1 in 4 women died from childbirth. The most common causes were blood loss and infection. But infection back then did not mean bacteria, it meant bad air, punishment for sin, or the work of the devil. Germs were unheard of. Water was not boiled. Hands were not washed. Antiseptics were still centuries away. Even in universities, trained birth attendants moved from one woman to the next without so much as wiping off their tools. Village midwives worked by instinct and memory. Alcohol was for drinking, not disinfecting. Giving birth in noble households was not any safer than in peasant huts. There were just more people in the room. In royal chambers, up to 50 witnesses might be present to make sure the baby was not swapped. Relatives, courtiers, servants, even strangers could be there, watching. Before labor, women were given a special drink called caudle, a thick, hot mixture of eggs, breadcrumbs, cream, wine, honey, nuts, spices, and ale. It looked like porridge, smelled like a damp cellar, and tasted like medicine someone forgot to cover 2 months ago. If the baby was in the wrong position, a metal hook might be used to extract it, piece by piece. This was not a named procedure. If the mother survived, that was considered a success. If not, well, people were prepared for that outcome too. Childbed fever or postpartum sepsis was so common that it stopped being feared. Fever, convulsions, death by the 3rd day, this was the usual end for a delivery gone wrong. Especially if dirty cloths were used, or if the midwife failed to notice that part of the placenta had remained inside. After delivery, women had to make do with what was available. To stop bleeding, they used ashes, soot, scraps of old cloth, tree resin, or even the soft center of bread. In some cases, pieces of fabric were inserted to try and block the hemorrhage. That often led to infection. The woman would die and no one understood why. In the countryside, urine was sometimes used for cleaning, especially when water was not available. Morning urine was believed to be especially effective. It was used to clean wounds, rinse the mouth, even brush teeth. There were only 2 real ways to avoid all of this. One was to join a convent. The other, folk contraception. Methods varied wildly. Charms made from frog bones, earwax, bits of mule placenta, grave moss, or most effectively, dried donkey dung. These were worn in small bags around the neck. Questionable as birth control, but they were great at keeping suitors away. We often imagine the Middle Ages as an era of knights leaping to defend ladies' honor. Say a word, and a man would draw his sword and challenge the offender to a duel. But in reality, it did not work like that. More often than not, no one rushed to a woman's defense. People simply pretended nothing was happening. And when a woman's honor was on the line, when things became serious, she sometimes had to fight for herself. Duels between women did happen. Not frequently, but they were not unheard of either. In some cases, they followed all the formal rules of a proper duel, with weapons, judges, and an audience. One of the most famous examples took place in Naples in 1552. 2 noble women, Isabella Carracci and Diambra Pettinella, were rivals for the same man, Fabio Zarisella. Apparently, he was quite popular because the dispute escalated to an official challenge. Diambra formally called Isabella out, and Isabella accepted. As tradition allowed, the insulted party got to choose the terms, and Isabella chose with flair, sword, mace, lance, shield, and warhorse. A crowd gathered on the appointed day. The duel was held under the supervision of Marquis Alfonso d'Avalos, who acted as judge. Both women appeared fully armored, Isabella in blue, Diambra in green, with a golden serpent on her helmet. At the signal, they charged. The lances shattered, and the fight continued with maces. Diambra struck a blow that knocked Isabella from her horse. She dismounted and demanded a concession. But Isabella got back up, drew her sword, and kept fighting. She even managed to knock Diambra's helmet off. In the end, surprisingly, Isabella conceded defeat voluntarily, and Diambra claimed her prize. What happened between them and Fabio after that, history does not say. There were also cases where women fought men. In 1395, Lord John Haddett was supposed to duel another nobleman over a land dispute. But just before the event, he was incapacitated by gout. So his daughter, Agnes Haddett, stepped in. She suited up in armor, rode out, and unhorsed her opponent. Then she removed her helmet, let her hair fall, and revealed who had actually won the fight. Another form of combat was the so-called marital duel, practiced in 13th to 14th century Germany and parts of France. This was a sanctioned way to resolve severe conflicts between husbands and wives, especially when the church forbade divorce. The man would be placed in a pit, with only his upper body exposed, and given a club. The woman remained above ground, armed with a bag of stones. He was to strike her with the club, while she tried to drag him out of the pit. Whoever won was considered to be in the right. Some of these fights were symbolic, but not always. If the man lost, he might be executed. If the woman lost, she could be buried alive. In later centuries, particularly between the 16th and 18th, rapier duels between women became more common. These often required the upper body to be bare, supposedly to prevent the concealment of weapons or armor. It was presented as a form of honest fight, though in practice it was often embarrassing and turned into a show. Even fencing manuals documented women's fighting. German fencing teacher Hans Talhofer, in his mid-15th century book, described a fight between a man and a woman as a real method of ending problems. His steps were clear and harsh, twisting private parts, hitting with a stick into the lower area, and face hits involving shoulder turns. All written with clear detail. So yes, women fought. When there was no other option. When no one helped. When respect or life depended on who stood in front of them. And at that time, there was only one thing to do: pick up a weapon and fight. This is not about feeling sorry or being seen as weak. It is about truth. Women went through all of this because they had no other way. That is how the world was. And that is also a part of history. If you found this video useful, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel so you do not miss next videos. And be sure to check out our other videos, where we talk about some of the darkest and most strange parts of history.